Jean was being hunted by a wolf with rabies in the wilderness of Quebec. Now, this story about Jean comes from Chibougamau, Quebec, and Jean was a fur trapper, and this happened in 1996. And he trapped along Lake Mistassini. So for long stretches in the winter, he would trap and hunt like lynx, wolves, fox. He knew wildlife and he knew the wilderness. So he is very experienced in everything that he would deal with out there. And he knew how to deal with the levels of isolation that it took to trap in the wilderness in Canada. So during this one winter, he knew that something was off on one night. And he could hear something crunching through the snow outside of his cabin. And it was late at night. He said it was about 1:30, maybe almost 2 o'clock in the morning. And he knew, oh, that sounds like a wolf. So he thought, well, I'll just go out there and I'll try and shoot it. And so he opened up his door and he stuck his rifle out there. But he couldn't get a shot. He couldn't see well enough to do it. But he could hear it crunching, getting a little close to the cabin. But then it took off into the woods. So he thought, well, I'll probably catch it in a trap. And, the next morning came, he got on his snowmobile and he went out and checked his line. And he got some animals, but no wolves. So he was like, okay. So again, around the same time at night, this time he heard it actually get on like the little, it wasn't like a porch, it was more like some steps right in front of the door. And he heard it kind of like sniffing around. And he said something sounded wrong. Like it was making this clattering sound with this, like that. And so again, he went to get his rifle and he opened up the door, and immediately right through the door, teeth went like that. And he said that there was just froth everywhere coming out of there. So he slammed it shut on the muzzle, and the creature, the animal, the wolf, pulled back, and he closed the door. And he knew then and there that this wasn't normal. A normal, regular wolf doesn't do that. No wild animal does. So he decided that, well, I'll go to bed and I'll try and hunt for it, when I go out on my line. So again, when the next morning comes, he goes out on his line. Again, no wolf, but as he's coming back, he gets back to his cabin and everything's fine for the most part, but he sees all these tracks all over, like, around his cabin, and he says they're kind of like haphazardly walked. Like, when an animal is walking, it has intention, and these tracks were just all over and not making any sense. So he goes into his cabin, and again, within a short amount of time, in broad daylight now, it is back at his door, and he can hear the teeth chattering. And so he looks out his window, and he sees it out on the porch or the steps in the snow, and he says that it's frothing at the mouth, and its head's going all around like this. And its jaw just keeps going like that. So he decides to go get his rifle, and he's going to shoot it out through the window. And when he comes back with his rifle, the wolf's gone. So he decides that he's just going to wait it out, because it will be back. And he waited and waited for a little bit, and it hadn't come back at the steps. But then he hears blood-curdling screams coming from behind the cabin. And he said it was just squealing, screaming, that he couldn't even imitate it. But he knew it was the wolf. And there was no window to show back out there. He had to go outside. So he decides to get his rifle. He's going to go out front, puts on his boots, his jacket, and just goes outside. And he's going around the cabin to where the screams are coming from. And he says that the wolf is still moving its head around in a weird, bizarre way. And it's kind of like twitching and still clattering its teeth and frothing at the mouth. And he says this time it's just spinning in circles. And he gets ready to get his rifle to shoot it. And as he's doing that, it actually starts running towards him. And he has to act incredibly fast because this animal has rabies. And as it's getting towards him, it is fast. And he says he shoots it once. And it starts spinning around again, really fast, still again screaming. And he actually starts running back to the front of his cabin. And he stands there at the steps waiting to see if it will come back around. Because he says that he wants to get it done and over with. And it's still screaming. And so he goes to peek around the cabin. And it is coming towards him at that corner. So he runs back into his cabin. And he wasn't fast enough because as he's closing the door, it gets his head through the door. And the froth is just flying. And it's trying to push itself through the door, despite the fact that he had shot it. And he starts taking his boot and trying to push it back through the door to get it back outside. And he does that. And it's still out there by the little steps. And it's just going around and around and around and around. So he goes back to his window. He takes his rifle and shoots it a second time. This time, it goes down. So he opens up the door, and it is deceased, truly deceased at this point. And he decides he gets some gloves on, and he puts it on the sled of a snowmobile. There's like a sled attached to the snowmobile in the back, and he takes it way out and decides to just discard of it far to the very end of where his trap line is. And he comes back, and he decides that he's gonna continue, trapping for the rest of the winter. And so that was his horrifying experience out there in the wilderness. Now, I personally would be booking it back to civilization after the first occurrence with a rabid wolf. I would not be staying. But that's his story. And if you want to share your stories with me, email me and I'll read them out to you.